Hello, welcome. My name is Mike. I'm going to be your virtual tour guide today. I'm originally from Wellington, New Zealand, and I've been living here in Berlin for the last 17 years. I moved here in 2003 after leaving New Zealand after studying European history, focusing my studies on 19th and 20th century European history. I started to travel the world and find my place. Now, I lived in France and Thailand and the Netherlands. Then I met a fantastic girl, a Berlin girl, when I was living in the Netherlands. So I moved to Berlin, fell in love with the girl, fell in love with the city and its history, and became a tour guide in 2005. Now with my lovely wife, we have 2 kids together. My daughter is 14 and my son is 10. Currently homeschooling, which has its ups and downs. But what we're going to be doing today is learning more about the Originals tour that we conduct in Berlin. The Originals Get Your Guide, Third Reich Cold War tour. We'll talk about the very interesting history from 1918 through until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and German reunification in 1990. So we're here now at the Brandenburg Gate. It's where we commence our Third Reich Cold War tour, the most iconic location in the city, the 1791 historical royal entry into the city of Berlin. I mean, Hitler knew the importance of the gate. So in 1933, when he was appointed the Chancellor, his supporters marched through the Brandenburg Gate. There were stamps with the Brandenburg Gate on it. Even in 1939, April 20, when Hitler turned 50 years of age, there was a parade through the Brandenburg Gate. Then during the Cold War years, after the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, then you've got the Brandenburg Gate between the 2 Berlin Walls. So for almost 30 years, it's the symbol of the division of Berlin, the division of Germany. The wall comes down in 1989. It's now the symbol of the reunification of Berlin and the reunification of Germany. So now let's walk through the Brandenburg Gate, go to the Reichstag, and learn more about how the Nazis came to power in 1933. So now we're here at the Reichstag House of Parliament. This is an old image of the Reichstag back in the imperialistic days between 1871 and 1918. Now the building, very important, the House of Parliament in 1918, in World War I, November the 9th. Philip Scheidemann, the Social Democrat, screams the Republic from this building. Long live this new Republic. The Emperor's abdicated the throne. So now the war is over, World War I is over, and we've got chaos here in Germany after the war. So these very early things, these events that occur, help the Nazis come to power in 1933. The army hate them. They've given up World War I. The royalists hate them. They've forced the emperor to abdicate. Then you've got this newly formed Communist Party, newfound self-belief of the Lenin's revolution in the East. They hate the Social Democrats. So you've got the Treaty of Versailles, embarrassing war agreement after World War II, basically dictated to the Germans, reduce their armed forces, massive war debt, and the Germans accept responsibility for World War I. So at the end of the war, you've got revolutions, you've got chaos, you've got political assassinations. From late 1918 until 1922, June, 376 political assassinations. Then you've got 1923, foreign forces occupying Germany. So the German government simply says, no passive resistance. Don't work for those occupying forces. We print money. So they print money. If you print money in an economy, you get what's known today as quantitative easing. It's lovely propaganda for inflation, super hyperinflation in 1923. This is a stamp. This stamp is 10 billion Reichsmarks. That's to send your mother a birthday card. What's the price of that's a stamp. What's the price of the birthday card? So you've got chaos after the war. You've got this fertile ground for extremism to gain power in the 1920s. But then there's stabilization. Then you've got the golden 20s, the roaring 20s, like the debauchery, decadence, a nice expressionism in the 1920s in the Weimar Republic. You've got experimentation with drugs and sexuality, an open society. Then the final nail in the coffin, depression. Late 1920s, the depression affects Germany drastically. Millions become unemployed by 1932, fertile breeding ground once again for extremism. So Adolf Hitler and his political party, the National Social German Workingmen's Party, in July of 1932, the most powerful political party in Germany. But there's still the president out there, the man with all the power. He needs to appoint Adolf Hitler because they think in the government, we can control this guy, Hitler. He'll be a puppet in our government. So on January the 30th, 1933, Hitler's appointed the Chancellor, but he doesn't want to be just a Chancellor in a democratic country. He wants to lead in a one-party state. So 23 weeks later, July 1933, democracy is destroyed. But the most important event that took place is 4 weeks after Hitler was appointed the Chancellor. You can see in this photograph the Reichstag burning. Yes, so the Reichstag fire, 4 weeks into Hitler's chancellorship in Germany. Now, the Nazi Party blamed the Reichstag fire on the communists. So within 3 weeks of the Reichstag fire, we've got concentration camps already opening up in Berlin and Germany, incarcerating opponents of Hitler's ideology. You've got April 1st, 1933, boycotting of Jewish stores, as you can see in this image right here. Then you've got the burning of the books. You've got the Gestapo created, all in such a brief amount of time. So in 23 weeks after Hitler was appointed the Chancellor, by July 1933, the dismantling of democracy. But then Hitler knows we've got to get people working again. So there's almost 6 million unemployed in 1932. We've got to find jobs for them. So autobahns are built, work schemes built for the people of this new Germany. Now, Germany coming out of the Depression, 1936, they're back on the world stage with the Summer Olympic Games here in Berlin. And you probably remember the hero of the 1936 Summer Olympics. If you remember that person's name, put it now in the comment box. I'll give you a few seconds. Now, exactly right. The hero of the 36 Olympics, Jack Lovelock, the New Zealand 1500 meter gold medalist. Well, you probably wrote Jesse Owens, who was the real hero, 4 gold medals. And this is pouring some freezing ice-cold water on that white racial supremacy of Nazi Germany. Then the brutality against these so-called inferior populations increases again in 1938 with the Crystal Night, the Night of the Broken Glass, where synagogues burnt down all over the German Empire. Then September 1st, 1939, World War II begins, the invasion of Poland. So 1939, the war starts, but Berlin wasn't really heavily devastated until the last phase of World War II. Autumn of 1943 until spring of 1945. The intensity of the bombing rates increases, and then the very destructive battle for Berlin. So around Hitler's birthday party, April 20, 1945, he's celebrating in the bunker, and then artillery shells start to land on Berlin. But the Soviet forces were racing to take this area where we're standing around the Reichstag, because that building, the House of Parliament, must be taken. That Soviet flag must be raised. So you want to be the first Soviet soldier with your flag on the Reichstag. The most famous photo taken is the one you can see right here. This is May 2nd, 1945. This is when the Berlin garrison surrendered. 6 days later, May 8th, Wilhelm Keitel, he signs the unconditional surrender of the German armed forces. The war is over in Europe. Celebrations across the European continent. You've got Churchill here addressing Whitehall. Then you've got Churchill once again sitting down, getting some rest. He's actually in Berlin. He's sitting just above the location where Hitler committed suicide in 1945, April 30th. He's sitting on top of Hitler's bunker. So celebrations in Europe, celebrations in the UK, but not celebrations in Berlin. Yeah, the war is over, but the next dictatorship is about to start. Germany divided, Berlin divided. We've got the Cold War. So the war is over, Germany divided. You can see a map here of the division of Germany. You can see the red. That's the Soviet-occupied East. And to the west of that, you've got the colorful west of Germany. Democracy. So you've got 2 continents at the end of World War II, Eastern Europe and Western Europe. But they were friends. The Soviets, the Americans, the British, the French, many other allied countries fighting that common villain of Hitler during the war. They've got nothing else in common apart from the hatred of Hitler. This is not going to end well. So to make the decisions on the occupation, the city, the capital city of Germany, Berlin, is divided also. Look in the map. In that red, you can see that small, colorful area of the western portion of Berlin. So how odd is this? You've got West Berlin democracy, capitalism, completely surrounded by socialism. So Stalin used to call West Berlin, the splinter in the socialistic heart of the East, or the island of democracy in the Red Sea of communism. Or the East Germans used to say that island shouldn't make an enemy of the ocean. So the old joke in West Berlin, going on holiday, where are you going? You go on east. You go north to East Germany. You head west to East Germany. Heading down south, East Germany. You go east, it's East Berlin. The odd thing is West Berlin was an island. So to supply West Berlin, the Western Allies have to bring produce from West Germany into West Berlin. Now, Stalin doesn't want that. He wants chaos in Berlin. So in 1948, the Berlin blockade starts. Currency reforms in Berlin. Stalin doesn't want the stabilization, blocks West Berlin. So now the only way to get supplies into West Berlin is to fly them in the Berlin airlift. So 1948, June until May 1949, the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift. So people have just left Nazi dictatorship and they've come into a socialistic dictatorship after the war. So people decide, I don't like this. I want to try democracy. So people are now leaving socialism in the 1940s through the 1950s. Because the thing called the Berlin Wall, that final loophole wasn't closed until 1961. Yeah, so 1961, the final loophole in the border is closed, the East-West Berlin border. Now with this image you can see here, you can see from 1949 until 1961, the exodus of people leaving socialism, going to capitalism. You can see hundreds of thousands of people are leaving every single year. I mean, 1953 is a big year. There was the East German uprising, which was crushed militarily by the Soviet occupying forces. So almost 331,390 left that year, going to the West. They are losing, it's the brain drain. They're losing the educated young people. Almost 50% of the millions who had left by 1961, they were under the age of 25 years. So the exodus, to stop this taking place, the only way to stop it was to close that loophole, and that loophole was the East-West Berlin border. So on that fateful night of August 13th, 1961, thousands of border guards, combat officers, closed the border overnight between East and West Berlin. First generation wall has been constructed. It's barbed wire. So 1961, Berlin Wall is built. So now you've got to conform to the ideology. Previously, you could live in the East or work in the West of Berlin. That was the open, porous border. Closed overnight so you conform to the ideology, because you know very quickly in the east of Germany, the east of Berlin, that border is now a fatal border. The first person that lost their life at the Berlin Wall was 9 days after the barbed wire closed. August 22nd, Ida Siegmann fell to her death at Bernauer Straße. Still, people thought, I've got to get away. I've got to get to capitalism. So people still tried to escape. Thousands of people escaped by 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, the building you can see in this image, that's the image of Hermann Göring's Air Force Ministry of Nazi Germany. It's actually, the image you can see is when Tom Cruise was portraying a very famous German resistor in a movie called Valkyrie in 2006. Tom Cruise was portraying Klaus Graf von Stauffenberg in Valkyrie movie. But the building, not just Göring's Air Force Ministry, but also the House of Ministers in East Germany. So that was the ministerial building. Now, very important building, a Nazi building repurposed for the East Germans. Now, my favorite escape actually took place from that building. You've got a family of three in 1965, the Holz-Apfel family. They're not too happy with life under socialism. They've planned their escape over 2 years. Heinz Holz-Apfel, his wife Jutta, and young 9-year-old son Günther. So in the East German House of Ministers, he's been planning it for a couple of years. So we decide on this day, late July 1965, I'm going. He had 4 family members in West Berlin on the other side of the Berlin Wall, because that building is only a few meters from West Berlin. So he takes his family in during the day. There's an out of order sign in the toilet. They wait, lights go out. He comes from his hiding place, 9:45 p.m., climbs to the top of the roof, family on the other side of the wall. So with a hammer and a zip wire, he ties it, throws the hammer over the wall. His family come out and secure that zip wire to a lorry, and with a handmade harness, 3 of them zip wire, flying fox over the Berlin Wall. So they go over the wall, guards are patrolling beneath it. But what I find fantastic about this story is the Soviet aerial patrol was watching these 3 escapes taking place, thinking they're not actually escaping. The Soviets thought that these 3 people were spies that the East German government was sending into the West because they were stealing these people from the East German House of Ministers. So from this location, you can see the Berlin Wall, the last final generation of wall, 4 generations of wall. The last generation right here is 12 feet high, 3.6 meters, the last generation of wall right by the East German House of Ministers. So 4 generations of Berlin Wall. First generation, barbed wire, 1961, closing it overnight. Then you've got the perfection of the wall defenses over the next 20-year period. By the 1980s, we've got the 4th and final generation wall, and you've got everything between those 2 physical borders to stop you getting from the east into the west. By the 1980s, there are 3 walls. So if you're coming from the east, trying to get into the west of Berlin, you've got the inner wall. So you've got the Hinterlandmauer. You get over that 8 to 10 foot high wall. Then you've got a signal fence. Trip the signal fence. It's a silent alarm that goes to the guard towers. They know where those the breaches in the border are taking place. You get over that, you jump onto what was nicknamed Stalin's Lawn, 14 centimeter spikes. Then you've got 302 guard towers. You've got free running dogs. You've got depressed areas so cars can't get through there, tank traps, bright lights, raked sand, then another 12 foot high, 3.6 meter high wall before you get into the west of Berlin. So the perfection of the wall defenses by the 1980s. I mean, the first escapes take place in 1961. Now, there were 5,075 successful escapes over the 28-year period, 2,500 in the first year. So the majority of the escapes take place in the early years because by the latter years, the perfection had taken place between these Berlin walls. Yes, and then our final location on this tour is Checkpoint Charlie. You may have heard of Checkpoint Charlie and thought to yourself, who was Charlie? What was Charlie? If you know who Charlie was or why it was called Checkpoint Charlie, put it in the comment bar right now. I'll give you a few seconds. Exactly right. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. It was the frenetic NATO military alphabet. It was the 3rd checkpoint. It was a checkpoint used for tourists to come from West Berlin into East Berlin, one of the 2 non-German visa control points. Diplomats and soldiers that wanted to go from East to West Berlin or West to East Berlin. It was the military checkpoint also. But just briefly after the Berlin Wall was built, remember that was August of 1961, by October 1961, there is a tank standoff at Checkpoint Charlie. You can see in this image. Alan Leitner Jr., he was off in his VW Beetle with his wife in 1961 to go across the border, as he was allowed to do, go to the Opera in East Berlin, stopped at the checkpoint, which now creates this military standoff. He knew his rights. He wanted to exercise his rights, but he was stopped at the border. So American tanks come down from the American sector, Soviet tanks on the Soviet sector. Maybe if a motorcycle backfires, this could have kicked off the 3rd World War here in Berlin at Checkpoint Charlie. Now, it's diffused after many, many hours, and the Soviet and the American tanks, they now travel backwards into their compounds, and World War III averted here in Berlin. But Checkpoint Charlie now is the mecca of tourism. It's the location where people come and experience what happened during the Cold War years. And we conclude our tour of Berlin's Third Reich Cold War sites with the most amazing of all the stories, the Berlin Wall, how it fell in 1989, November the 9th. Very interesting story about a failed press conference. So within 5 hours of this failed press conference, Günter Schabowski said the wrong thing at 6:53 p.m. Within 5 hours, 11:30 p.m., the wall is down. What happened? What was in that speech in 1989? Well, when this COVID-19 crisis has finished, you will be able to travel to Berlin, come on the original Third Reich Cold War tour with me or one of our guides in Berlin and learn about what happened in 1989 and experience the sites you've seen virtually today up close and live. So that's it from me. We've just gone over the years of 1918 through 1989. Thank you very much for joining me on this virtual tour of the Originals Get Your Guide Third Reich Cold War tour of Berlin. I can't wait to actually meet you in person and show you all these amazing historical sites in Berlin. But if you like, you can add this to your wish list or also purchase a voucher. All the links are supplied below. But thanks once again. Look after each other and be safe. See you here in Berlin.